I know the exact moment my future mother-in-law decided I wasn't good enough for her son. It was when she asked what I did for a living and I told her. Not because my answer was wrong, because she didn't believe it. We'd been together for almost 3 years, Jonah and I. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the part that actually matters. My boyfriend's parents lived about 40 minutes north of the city, in one of those neighborhoods where every house has a two-car garage and a flagpole and a motion sensor light that clicks on when you pull into the driveway at 7:15 on a Saturday evening. I noticed the light. I noticed it because I'd been sitting in the car for about 2 minutes after we parked, just breathing, just doing the thing I always do before a high-stakes situation, which is reminding myself that I have survived worse. I had survived worse. I just hadn't told him how much worse. His name is Jonah. I should say that now because I spent 3 years of my life loving this man, and he deserves to be called something other than my boyfriend for the rest of this story. Jonah is kind in the way that some people are kind without even knowing it. The way he always refills your water glass before you realize it's empty. The way he remembers what your coworker's kid's name is, even though you only mentioned it once in passing. He is not a complicated person. He is steady. I had not had a lot of steady in my life before him, and when I found it, I held on. His parents were a different situation. His father had spent 31 years as an architectural engineer. He'd worked on municipal projects mostly. Bridges, public buildings, infrastructure contracts for the county. He'd retired 2 years earlier at 66 and spent most of his time now building birdhouses in the garage and watching college football. His name was Douglas. I knew all of this because Jonah had told me, piece by piece, the way you share information about family when you're not sure how it will land. His mother's name was Pauline. She had been a school administrator, principal, then district coordinator, then something with a longer title that meant she oversaw curriculum standards for 11 schools in a 3-county region. She had retired the same year as Douglas, and from what I could tell, she had not entirely adjusted to the retirement part. She still woke up at 5:30. She still wore blazers to dinner. I knew all of that too. What I had not told Jonah in 3 years of being together was what I actually did. Not the surface version, not the version I gave at dinner parties when I didn't feel like getting into it. I had told him the real version, obviously. He knew, he'd always known. But I had not told him how much it would matter in that room, on that specific night, with those specific people. I should have. I parked the car. I took one breath. I got out. Pauline answered the door before we knocked. She had been watching from the front window. I saw the curtain move, and she opened the door with a smile that was perfectly calibrated, warm but measured, the smile of someone who had spent decades managing people and had not fully turned it off. "You must be Nora," she said. She said it like she already knew things about me and was deciding how to arrange them. "I am," I said. "It's really nice to finally meet you." Douglas appeared behind her, taller than I expected, with Jonah's same way of holding his shoulders slightly back. He shook my hand and told me to come in. Come in, they'd been looking forward to it. I believed him. I wasn't sure about her. The house was warm and smelled like something roasting in the oven. There were framed photos along the hallway. Jonah at what looked like 8 years old in a Halloween costume. Jonah in a high school graduation robe. Jonah with a dog I hadn't known he'd had. I slowed down for that one. "His name was Biscuit," Pauline said behind me. "He passed the year Jonah started college." "I'm sorry," I said. "He was a good dog," she said, and moved past me toward the kitchen. We sat in the living room while dinner finished. Douglas asked how the drive up had been, and I told him it was fine. Traffic had mostly cleared by the time we got on the highway. He nodded. He told me that stretch was always better after 6. We talked about the road construction on Route 9 for a while, the kind of conversation that exists purely to fill space while everyone figures out who everyone is. Then Pauline came back with drinks, sparkling water, iced tea, a glass of red wine for herself, and she sat across from me and she asked the question, "So, Nora, what is it you do?" I had been asked this question approximately 10,000 times. I had given approximately 4 different answers depending on who was asking. The full answer, the short answer, the deflecting answer, and the one I used when I was tired and just wanted the conversation to move on. I gave her the full answer. I don't know why. Maybe because I was tired of the deflecting one. Maybe because I was nervous, and nervous people sometimes overcorrect. I'm a structural engineer, I said. I specialize in forensic structural assessment. I work with insurance companies, legal teams, and sometimes federal agencies when there's a question about why a building failed or didn't fail. There was a pause. Douglas leaned forward slightly. Forensic structural? Failure analysis, mostly. When a structure collapses or shows critical damage, someone has to figure out why. Whether it was design error, material defect, maintenance failure, construction deviation, that's my work. He looked genuinely interested. His mouth had opened just slightly the way people's mouths do when their brain is processing something faster than their face can keep up. Pauline had a different expression. That sounds very specialized, she said. It is, I said. How long have you been doing it? About 6 years. I moved into the forensic side after 3 years in structural design. She nodded slowly, the nod that means I'm filing this away rather than I believe you. And you went to school for engineering, civils and structural engineering, graduate degree in structural mechanics. Where did you do your graduate work? I told her. It's a good school. It's a very good school. She nodded again in the same way. What happened next was subtle enough that if I hadn't been paying attention, I might have missed it. Douglas said something about infrastructure, something about the bridge project he'd worked on near the state line in 2009, a renovation contract, and how the soil analysis had come back differently than the original surveys. A real question, a professional question, the kind of question that assumes the person across from you can handle it. I answered it. We talked for a few minutes about soil-bearing capacity and how it interacts with foundation retrofitting. He asked a good follow-up question. I gave him a good answer, so it was the first time since walking through the door that I felt like myself, and then Pauline said, "Douglas, the timer." He got up, the conversation ended. We went to the dining room. Dinner was pot roast, roasted carrots, mashed potatoes. It was good. Douglas had apparently done most of the cooking, and he was pleased about it, and I liked him for that. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about Jonah, his job, his apartment, whether he was eating enough vegetables, a conversation that was clearly routine between the three of them, and had simply expanded to include a fourth person. I sat there and ate and participated and felt for a moment like maybe I had been wrong about the tension. Maybe it was just first meeting nerves, mine and hers, and it would smooth out. Then Douglas mentioned a project that had been in the news, a parking structure that had partially collapsed during construction in a city about 90 miles from us, 3 workers injured, investigation underway. He'd seen it on the local news that morning. Terrible situation, he said. I'd be curious what they find. Early reports pointed to the formwork, I said, the temporary support structure for the concrete pour. If that's where the failure initiated, you're usually looking at either an under-design of the shoring system or a premature stripping, pulling the forms before the concrete had reached sufficient strength. Douglas nodded. That matches what I was thinking. The pour schedule on those deck pours is tight when you're under a deadline. It almost always comes back to schedule pressure, I said. That or a disconnect between what the engineer of record specified and what actually happened in the field. It was Pauline who spoke next. Of course, she said, with a kind of gentle authority. The real issue in most of these cases is oversight. The engineering side gets the attention, but if you don't have proper site management, you're right that oversight matters, I said. But the failure point in a shoring collapse is almost always a technical specification issue. The oversight problem is usually downstream. Someone was watching but didn't have the training to recognize that the shoring wasn't adequate for the load. She paused, just briefly. I spent a lot of years in institutional management, she said. And what I've found is that when something goes wrong, it's almost never just the technical side, it's the people. The people make the decisions, yes, I said. But in structural failure, the decision that matters most is usually made months earlier on paper. By the time someone is on that job site, the conditions for failure are often already set. She smiled at me. The smile had shifted. It was still polished, still controlled, but something underneath it had adjusted. I suppose you'd know more about that than I would, she said, in the tone of voice that doesn't actually concede anything. Jonah, next to me, refilled his water glass. He was doing what he always did when things got complicated, which was stay very quiet and hope the complicated part passed on its own. It didn't. About 10 minutes later, Douglas asked whether I'd ever worked on any projects in this part of the state. I mentioned a school gymnasium. I'd been brought in as a consultant on a liability case involving a roof failure. He knew the building. He'd seen the news coverage at the time. We got into the specifics, and I told him what the investigation had found, and he said that aligned with something he'd suspected when he'd seen the original photos. I liked Douglas. I liked him quite a bit. Pauline put her fork down. "Nora," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. "How old are you?" I told her. 31. She nodded. "And you've been doing this work for 6 years. Forensic assessment for 6. Yes, a few years before that in design. You started young." "I did," I said. "I finished my undergraduate degree at 20 and went straight into graduate school. I started working before I finished my dissertation, actually. I was doing structural reviews for a firm in the city while I was writing." "That's impressive," she said, in the tone that means that seems unlikely. There was a pause. Douglas reached for the serving dish. Jonah had gone so still beside me that I could feel the stillness. "It's just," Pauline said, and then stopped. "Just," I said. She chose her words carefully. She was good at that. "A field like this, structural forensics, it seems like the kind of thing where experience matters. Where being in the field for decades is what makes someone qualified." "Experience matters enormously," I said. "There's no substitute for it. But the analytical framework for failure assessment is also something you develop through technical training. The two things compound over time." "Of course," she said. "I just wonder how much weight, say, an insurance company or a courtroom would give to someone." She paused, "at the beginning of a career." The room was quiet. I set my fork down, not because I was angry. I set it down because I wanted both hands free, the way I do when I'm about to explain something I need to explain clearly. "I testified in federal court for the first time when I was 28, I said. "The case involved a condominium building on the coast. Partial wall collapse after a hurricane. The question was whether the failure was storm-related or pre-existing structural deficiency. My analysis supported the position that the failure was initiated by a design flaw that predated the storm. The jury agreed. That verdict was for $47 million. Pauline's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Last year," I continued, "I was lead analyst on an investigation requested by the National Transportation Safety Administration. The project took 14 months. My report is cited in the regulatory change they issued in March. I didn't say it loudly. I didn't say it with any particular emphasis. I said it the way I say anything that is simply true and simply relevant." Douglas had put his fork down too. "The NTSA report," he said. "In March." "Yes, the one about the parking structure design standards." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I read that report. I thought you might have," I said. "It got a fair amount of coverage in the trade publications." Jonah, at some point during all of this, had stopped pretending to eat. Pauline picked up her wine glass. She turned it slightly in her hand, the way people do when they're buying a second to recalibrate. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "I hadn't expected that. I'd expected a pivot, a subject change, a gracious redirect, the kind of conversational move that lets everyone pretend a thing didn't happen. I had not expected a direct statement. 'You don't have to.' I started. 'I do,' she said. I was skeptical in a way that wasn't fair, and I let it show, and that was rude. I'm sorry." She was looking directly at me. There was no performance in it, no calculated warmth, no administrative composure. Just a woman who had said a thing she meant. "I appreciate that," I said. "You're very good at your work," she said. "That much is obvious. Thank you." "Douglas spent 31 years in structural engineering," she said. "He would know." "I know," I said. "We've been having a very good conversation." Douglas laughed, a real laugh, sudden and short. She gave me a better answer on the soil compression question than most of the junior engineers I supervised. That question was interesting, I said. The alluvial deposit issue you were describing, that's the kind of thing that gets missed in preliminary surveys all the time. We talked for another 2 hours. Dessert was apple pie from a bakery 2 towns over that Pauline told me had been there since 1987, which mattered to her, and I found I didn't mind that it mattered to her. Toward the end of the night, while Jonah and Douglas were in the kitchen doing dishes, Pauline and I sat in the living room with decaf coffee and the particular quiet of two people who have already said the real things and are now deciding how to be with each other. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Go ahead. Why the blazer?" I said. "For dinner at home." She looked down at herself. Then she laughed. A real one, not the calibrated kind. "Habit," she said. 30 years of habit. "Douglas keeps telling me to stop. I think it suits you," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "You know, when Jonah first told me about you, he said you were quiet. He said you didn't talk about yourself much." "That's true," I said. "He also said that when you did talk, it was worth listening to." I didn't say anything to that. I just looked at the coffee cup in my hands. "He was right," she said. On the drive home, Jonah was quiet for about 5 miles. Then he said, "She liked you." "I know," I said. "She doesn't usually," he started. "I know," I said again. He reached over and put his hand on mine on the gear shift. We drove the rest of the way in the dark, the highway lights going by overhead in long orange intervals, and I thought about the thing Pauline had said. Not the apology. That had been real, and I had received it as real. I thought about the moment before it, the moment when she'd picked up her wine glass and turned it in her hand and recalibrated. There's a version of that moment where I had handled it differently, where I'd let it pass, deflected, changed the subject, made it easier for everyone. I had done that before in other rooms with other people. It's not a bad strategy. Sometimes the smoothest path is the right one. But there's something that happens when you're 31 years old and you have spent the better part of a decade earning something real. Earning it through work that is hard and specific and that you are genuinely good at. And someone assumes it away with a smile and a well-calibrated tone. Something in you stops wanting the smooth path. Not because you want to fight, because you've simply stopped being willing to make yourself smaller to fit into a shape someone else decided you should be. I didn't make her feel bad. I don't think I made anyone feel bad. I just told the truth in a room where someone had decided the truth wasn't likely. That's all. That's the whole story. Except not quite. 3 months later, Douglas called me. He'd been asked to consult informally on a residential project, a neighbor's addition, that a local contractor was flagging for a potential foundation issue. He wanted a second set of eyes, he said, someone who thought about these things differently. We spent about 2 hours on a video call, going over the photos and the soil report. At the end of it, he said, "You know, I think I was the easy one that night." "What do you mean?" I said. "Pauline's the one who does the vetting in our house," he said. "Always has been. If she decided you were fine, you were fine. I was just going to like whoever Jonah brought home." I laughed. "That's a very sweet thing to admit." "Don't tell her I told you that," he said. "I didn't. But I thought about it for a while after we hung up. About how sometimes the person you think is the obstacle is actually just the door, and the one standing quietly behind them is the one who's already decided whether to unlock it. Pauline had unlocked it. I hadn't known that going in, but I know it now, and knowing it makes me want to keep being the kind of person worth unlocking it for.